Welcome to my channel. Today, I'm excited to share an extraordinary story that intertwines the simple act of selling bread with the fate of a piece of land. The sea did not merely surround the island, it was the island's architect, its jailer, and its god. It had carved the black cliffs into fantastical, tortured shapes, polished the beaches to a blinding white sugar, and filled the deep, clear lagoons with a kaleidoscope of life. The locals, in the few fishing villages that clung to the mainland coast, called it Ilha do Sussurro, the Isle of Whispers. They said the wind through its strange rock formations didn't howl or sing, but murmured secrets in a language older than man. They also said it was cursed, a beautiful poison, and they gave its jewel-toned waters a wide berth. This was the world that swallowed the Ethelred, a three-masted merchant bark bound for the Indies with a hold full of English wool and a crew of 32 desperate men. Desperation was the currency of such voyages. Some were running from debtors' prisons, some from broken hearts, some from the grim, soot-choked futures of industrial cities. They were, to a man, fleeing something. They found, instead, the storm. It was a biblical fury, a wall of black water and shrieking wind that rose from a placid sea as if summoned from the abyss. The Ethelred was a toy in its grip, her masts snapping like kindling, her hull groaning its death rattle. Captain Edmund Crowe, a man of flint and resolve, tied himself to the wheel and was the first to be consumed. His final roar lost to the gale. 12 men survived. Not through skill or courage, but through the sheer, random cruelty of chance. They were the ones who found a loose cask to cling to, a section of splintered mast, or who were simply flung by a great wave towards the dark shape on the horizon. They fought the churning, debris-strewn water for hours, their strength ebbing, their hope dying, until one by one, their feet found sand. They collapsed on the beach, vomiting salt water, their bodies bruised and bleeding, their minds shattered. The storm vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue and a sun that felt like a benediction. As their senses returned, the beauty of the place struck them with the force of a physical blow. The air was thick with the scent of exotic blossoms and fertile earth. Lush, unfamiliar greenery spilled down from the cliffs. The water in the lagoons was so clear they could see individual shells on the sandy bottom 20 feet down. Silas Thorne was the first to speak. He had been the ship's carpenter, a quiet, watchful man with clever hands and a mind that was always calculating angles and outcomes. "We're alive," he said, his voice a raw croak. It was not a celebration, but a statement of fact, the first variable in a new equation. The others were a mixed lot: Big Tom, the bosun's mate, built like a bull and simple in his wants; the Morgan twins, wiry and inseparable; a young ship's boy called Pip with wide. In the early days, fear gripped their hearts like a vice, but survival brought with it determination. Lingering on the edge of despair, they forged a fragile existence among the emerald trees and swaying palms. Each sunrise offered a new chance, an opportunity to scavenge for sweet water and ripe fruit dangling like jewels from the branches. Their laughter, although strained, echoed against the distant cliffs as they built lean-tos, creating a threadbare safety net that would barely hold their trepidation at bay. As the days blended into weeks, the initial thrill of survival began to pale. Hope, once a bright flame, flickered and faltered with every passing moment. The signal fire atop Lookout Ridge, barely visible against the vibrant sky, became a monument to their waning expectations. Days turned into a drudgery of monotony, a cycle of scavenging and worry. They watched the horizon, once teeming with promise, morph into a cruel reminder of isolation. Reality settled in like a gray fog, and Silas's revelation hung heavily in the air, replacing hope with a crushing understanding of their fate. Then came the day of discovery, an unplanned venture that would alter their course forever. They stepped gingerly upon the sand, anticipation mingling with dread, and as they entered the cove, they stumbled upon the remains of a magnificent ship, a ghost from the past enshrined in nature's arms. Within the decaying hull, light glinted off treasures that seemed to pulse with a life of their own: gold, jewels, and silks that whispered of far-off lands. The air buzzed with electric excitement as they examined their fortune, Silas's eyes lighting up with dreams once deferred. His words cut through the air, sparking visions of grandeur. No longer just castaways, they could carve out a legacy, an empire in their newfound paradise. The wheels of ambition turned as they collectively committed to transformation, setting the stage for their ascendance. What began as a harrowing struggle for survival now morphed into the ambitious blueprint for their kingdom, forging unity and purpose in the isolation of their tropical tomb. The islanders, now well-fed and organized, greeted them with feigned hospitality. That night, as the visitors slept, the 12 fell upon them. It was brutal, short, and horrifyingly efficient. 2 of the fishermen were killed in the struggle. The other 3, young and strong, were chained. Their boat was scuttled. The kingdom had its first slave. The act of violence crossed a moral Rubicon. There was no going back. They were no longer victims of the sea, they were its predators. Silas, with his cold intelligence, became their undisputed leader. Big Tom, who enjoyed the exercise of his strength, became the enforcer. The others fell in line, their scruples drowned not in seawater, but in gold and the exhilarating power of absolute dominion. They used the treasure to bait a new kind of trap. They would row out to the shipping lanes in the captured fishing boat, now repaired, and play the distressed mariners. A friendly hail, an offer of fresh water and fruit, and then, once the target ship was close enough, a swift, violent boarding. They became experts at it. They took everything, the ship's cargo, its provisions, and most importantly, its people. Men were pressed into service. Women, if there were any, became prizes. Those who resisted were thrown to the sharks. The legend of the beautiful, Crystal began to grow in portside taverns, a ghost story told to scare drunken sailors. Over the years, the colony grew. The palace, which they named Sanctuary, began to take shape. It was a bizarre, magnificent amalgamation of stolen dreams. Its foundations were of local volcanic rock, but its walls were paneled with rich mahogany ripped from the captain's quarters of a captured British frigate. Its windows were of leaded glass from a French merchantman. The Grand Hall was lit by a colossal chandelier, once the pride of a Dutch East Indiaman, now dripping with candles above a floor of polished marble tiles. Tapestries from Flanders covered the walls, muffling the sound of the ever-present sea. It was luxurious beyond imagining, a monument to avarice and theft. The original 12 were the lords of this realm. They dressed in fine silks and linens, ate from silver plate, and drank vintage wine from crystal goblets. They had everything. But a hollowed-out man, no matter how you dress him, remains hollow. Silas Thorne, now called the governor, sat on a throne carved from the helm of the Ethelred, his eyes as empty as the horizon he once scanned for rescue. The others drank themselves into stupors, fought over trivialities, and pursued debaucheries with a frantic energy that spoke of a deep, unacknowledged despair. They had built a perfect world, and it was a perfect hell. The disease did not arrive with a dramatic cough or a visible rash. It began with a profound lethargy, a draining of vitality. A strong man would take to his bed complaining of a chill and never rise again. His skin would grow cold and waxy, his breath shallow, and within 3 days, he would be gone. There was no pain, no bloody flux, just a swift, silent extinguishing of life. The island's physician, a Dar Scotsman kidnapped from a naval hospital ship, could do nothing. He called it the White Silence and succumbed to it himself without offering any other diagnosis. It swept through the population of Sanctuary with terrifying speed. Within a fortnight, the bustling palace fell quiet. The laughter in the great hall ceased. The only sounds were the moaning of the sick and the frantic prayers of the dying. The lords died in their stolen silken beds. Big Tom, his great strength useless, faded away like a guttering candle. The Morgan twins died within hours of each other. One by one, the original 12, the architects of this paradise, were carried out and buried in a plot overlooking the sea they had conquered. Only one man was left. Alastair Finch. He had been the ship's clerk on the Ethelred, a slight, nervous man with a talent for numbers and a deep-seated fear of everything. He had always been on the periphery, following Silas's orders, keeping the accounts of their plunder, comforting himself with the order of ledgers and inventories. He had never been a leader, never been strong, never been brave. He was a follower, and now there was no one left to follow. For a few days, Alistair moved through the vast, echoing palace like a ghost. The silence was absolute. He was surrounded by the greatest treasures of the world, and he would have traded it all for the sound of another human voice. He ate from the dwindling stores in the pantry, but the feast halls, capable of seating 100, mocked him with their emptiness. Then, the hunger began. It wasn't the simple craving for food. The pantry, though low, still had sacks of rice, jars of preserves, a side of salted pork. This was a different kind of hunger. It was a deep, cellular ache, a void that opened up in the very core of his being. It felt ancient and cruel. It felt like the island itself was starving and was now feeding on him. He could eat a full meal of rice and pork and feel emptier, more ravenous than before. The luxurious food turned to ash in his mouth, providing no sustenance. The white silence had taken the lives of the others. This new hunger, this cruel hunger, was coming for his soul. He tried to fish, but his hands shook too much to hold a line. He tried to gather fruit, but the trees at the edge of the jungle seemed to recede from him, their branches pulling their bounty out of reach. The hunger was a constant, grinding pain, a fist in his gut that tightened with every passing hour. Driven mad by the pain and the terrifying solitude, he stumbled from the palace, down through the terraced gardens, and onto the sugar-white beach of the main lagoon. He fell to his knees in the sand, his body racked with tremors. He was a skeleton draped in fine brocade, his eyes sunken pools of terror. He raised his face to the empty sky and the endless sea, and he cried out. It was not a word, not a scream, but a raw, primal sound of utter need. It was the sound of a man being unmade. Please. Food. Anyone. Help me. His voice, thin and reedy, was swallowed by the immensity of the scene. But then something happened. The acoustics of the island, the strange whispering cliffs and coves, took his pathetic cry and wove it into something else. The wind caught it, the rock formations shaped it, the sea itself echoed it back. His desperate plea was amplified, distorted, and projected out across the water. It no longer sounded like a single man dying on a beach. It sounded like a chorus of voices, a haunting, melodic siren song of need, drifting out to sea, a beacon of despair. For 2 days and 2 nights, Alistair lay on the beach, his cries growing weaker, the cruel hunger gnawing at his insides. He was on the very precipice of death, his vision narrowing to a pinprick of light, the world reduced to the feel of sun-baked sand on his cheek and the agonizing void within. On the mainland, in a dusty, sun-baked village, the story of the Isle of Whispers was told to a young man named Matteo. He was a baker's son, a practical boy with flour perpetually under his fingernails and a heart that was too soft for his own good. He listened, captivated and skeptical, to the old fishermen's tales. They spoke of a ghost island that sang to sailors, luring them to their doom. They spoke of a palace of gold where demons lived. But Matteo also heard another story, whispered by a traveling monk who tended to the poor. This monk spoke not of demons, but of lost souls. He spoke of a place where men had turned their backs on God and on their fellow man, and of the divine punishment that must surely follow. He spoke of the spiritual hunger that could consume a man long after his belly was full. These stories collided in Matteo's mind. When the strange, beautiful melody of need drifted across the water one still afternoon, reaching the village as a faint, almost musical sigh, the fishermen crossed themselves and barred their doors. Matteo, however, stood on the shore, listening. He didn't hear a siren's song of death. He heard a cry for help. It was the same ache he heard in the voice of a beggar asking for bread, amplified 1,000-fold. Against all advice, against all sense, he loaded his small, sturdy skiff with a sack of his finest bread, loaves made with his father's precious white flour, baked that very morning, a jug of fresh water, and a small knife. He set out, following the sound, a single, foolish, compassionate soul sailing towards a legend of damnation. He found the island exactly as the stories had described, breathtakingly beautiful and profoundly unsettling. The silence was heavy, pregnant with secrets. He sailed into the lagoon, his eyes wide at the impossible palace perched on the cliffside. It was even more magnificent than the tale suggested, but it was also utterly dead. No guards challenged him. No faces peered from the windows. He followed the sound of weak, ragged breathing and found Alistair Finch. The sight was not what he had expected. This was no demon king. This was a wraith, a broken thing curled in the sand, clad in ridiculous finery that hung off his emaciated frame. The air around him seemed to shimmer with his starvation. Matteo's heart, that soft, impractical heart, broke. He knelt, his hand shaking as he reached out. "Sir," he said, his voice gentle. I heard you. I've brought food." Alistair's eyes fluttered open. They focused not on Matteo's face, but on the sack he carried. A smell, the holy, simple scent of baked bread, had cut through the miasma of his despair. A sound escaped his lips, a dry rattle of pure, unadulterated want of bread. He croaked. "Give it, please." Matteo hurriedly opened the sack and broke off a piece of a crusty loaf. He offered it to Alistair. The man's hand, a claw of bone and skin, shot out and grabbed it, but he was too weak to bring it to his mouth. Matteo helped him, holding the bread to his lips. As the morsel touched his tongue, a transformation began. The terrible, grasping hunger that had owned him for days seemed to recede, just an inch. Life, real life, not the cursed half-existence of the island, flooded back into his body. The promise of sustenance, of salvation, was moments away. But in that moment of clarity, as the crumbs touched his tongue, Alistair Finch truly saw what was before him. He saw not just a loaf of bread, but the boy who had brought it. He saw the compassion in his eyes, the simple humanity that had been absent from this island for decades. He saw the antithesis of everything they had built. This boy had come not to take, but to give. And he, Alistair, was about to take his final payment from such a person. He looked past the boy, at the obscene palace he had helped build. He saw the ghosts of the men they had murdered, the women they had enslaved, the lives they had ruined to create their gilded nightmare. The white silence had been a mercy. This cruel hunger, he understood now, was not a physical ailment. It was the final reckoning. It was the accumulated starvation of their souls, the void created by a lifetime of taking without ever giving, of feeding on others without ever being nourished themselves. To eat this bread, given in pure compassion, would be the ultimate corruption. He would be consuming the very goodness that could have saved him, had he ever chosen it. A profound peace settled over him. The desperation left his eyes. He slowly, deliberately, pushed Matteo's hand away. The piece of bread fell into the white sand between them. "No," Alistair whispered, his voice suddenly clear. "I cannot." Matteo stared, confused. "But you are starving. You must eat." "I am," Alistair said, a faint, sad smile touching his cracked lips. "But not for this." He gestured weakly at the palace, the island, all of it. "It is yours. All of it. The palace. The treasure. The island. It is paid for. With this." He looked at